Welcome to the CX Sports Podcast. With us, you will discover how to unlock the potential of your team and how to make the right decisions for your club off the pitch. Hello to all our listeners from the CX Sports Stadium podcast room. Whether you are watching us on YouTube, Spotify, or on Facebook, you're joining us and we're joining you through social media. And that's going to be the topic of today's podcast. With us today, we have Dom Einhorn, CEO of CX Sports Podcast and powerhouse behind the transformation of the Sala Rugby Club, whose presence on social media has made waves in France and even across the Atlantic. Thank you so much, Dom. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jasper.
All right, Dom, you're quite active on social media, especially LinkedIn and Facebook. Would you say it's leisure or more of an extra tool in your toolbox?
I think it being a tool in my toolbox makes it leisure. So I think that I very rarely use social media for personal reasons. Occasionally I may do. Never on LinkedIn, obviously. Rarely on Facebook. But I think the lines are somewhat blurred when what you're doing for a living is a passion, where your personal life tends to be intertwined with your business life. And sometimes that tends to work in your favor as well.
I like it. Well, we're here to talk about sports teams. So for sports teams, it feels like social media has become one more arena where teams have to fight it out. What would you say are the advantages for teams of investing in social media?
Well, it's interesting because we've actually come across teams, as we may call them, on social media that looked extremely professional. And there were just experiments, social media experiments. There was no real team. Almost like I forget the name of the movie with about 15 years ago with the avatar, an imaginary avatar, but something very similar to that. So it shows us that what we see is very often what we believe, and that's something we should take home as a team owner. Or if we're in charge of branding or marketing for a team, is that sometimes the impression of the team tends to be equally as important, if not more important, as the team itself. Otherwise, imaginary teams couldn't have 100,000 followers on Facebook, for example.
No, indeed. Well, I'm glad you brought up branding because last week we talked about rebranding and the importance for a team. Could you dive a little bit more into how social media can be used to help a team achieve that branding message?
Yeah, I think for most teams, especially in the amateur space, social media is obviously a low barrier of entry type of a tool and a mechanism that allows them to quickly, efficiently, without a lot of technical knowledge, jump into the fray and establish a brand, slowly develop a brand using the tools that are given to them by the social networks, be it Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc. So I think that's definitely the tools that teams should avail themselves of because they are free, although free can be a deceiving word because once you have 1 million followers, free can become very expensive. And that's actually a problem that at CX Sports we intend to resolve as well, where we're basically working on modules that allow influencers, and today everybody seems to be an influencer. You can be an influencer even if you have only 100 followers, for example. But where we're helping them monetize their influence and not be victim of what we call in France the GAFAs of the world.
Indeed. They do hold a lot of power. And social media has become so important in our day-to-day lives, but it's also a tool for marketing. What makes it different than other tools, traditional tools for marketing and branding, especially for sports teams?
Yeah, I think what's happened over the last 15 years is this element of immediacy that didn't exist before, where I grew up in a world in my 20s where in order to retrieve information, we had something that was called fax on demand. You type in a number on your fax, and then you had rolls of paper rolling out with the information that you needed. Could have been a technical description. You couldn't download it. It was pre-internet. And obviously the pace of technology has accelerated. And in a sense where everybody today is seeking instant gratification. And social media obviously has exploded as a result of that because it puts processes, it delivers processes in immediate form that used to be tape delayed in the past. You need something, any kind of information. You look it up today on your smartphone. You need a sports score. You need the weather. You need anything. It's right at your fingertips. The phone, the device has become an extension of your arm, or maybe even a third arm. When the phone is not in your hand, you have a tendency of you think you're missing a limb. And obviously that has a profound impact on how we behave, what we believe, how we act, how we react. And as a marketer, you have to be on the forefront of figuring out how people acquire knowledge, information, how they digest it, how they engage with it, and put yourself in that path in a world where today's attention span, social media, is less than 3 seconds. Fortunately, hopefully the podcast listeners are listening more than 3 seconds. That's the exception to the rule, by the way. Podcasts, if you look at data about podcasts, roughly 80% of the people who engage in a podcast finish the stream, and even if the stream lasts 45 minutes to an hour, as opposed to social media where you have endless scroll, and to really catch someone's attention has become increasingly difficult.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of sports teams also use social media as a sort of web page, and often they neglect their web pages in the process. Do you think sports teams can or should become entirely dependent on social media, or is it an additional tool that they should be using?
I think it's an excellent question, because what has happened de facto is that a lot of them have done that, especially in the amateur space.
Indeed.
Where they've kind of abandoned their own turf, their websites. They may have a website, but hardly getting any traffic. There are no engagement mechanisms there. And it's, in my opinion, extremely dangerous to put all your eggs into the social media basket, because you never own that space.
Right.
You never own that user. You may think you own your fan. You don't. You may think you own yourself, but you don't. You're resident on someone else's platform. Has its advantages, clearly. You can lease that space. You're being monetized very often against your will.
Yeah.
You may not be aware that you're being monetized. And most importantly, when you publish content on social media, there's usually a cost associated with publishing that content. Even if you just take your car to take a great shot 5 miles down the road, you're spending gas money and some of your time. You then post the publication on social media, and it is being monetized on your behalf by the entity.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem that will be resolved over the next few years. We're working on some of those solutions in the sports space specifically, where we work with amateur sports teams and athletes to allow them to monetize their following, so that now when they're actually publishing content, engaging content, they actually have a quote-unquote sponsor for that content, to avoid that, look, it's only a one way, where the big firms that manage our data make all the money, and you, the content producer, makes absolutely nothing. I think those days are counted.
Well, I think that's what we talk about when we talk about turning Davids into Goliaths, right?
That's true.
And speaking of helping amateur sports teams, Sala Rugby, the flagship team for CX Sports' program, has a huge following on social media. By some counts, it's among the top 10 rugby teams in France. How have we managed that?
First of all, there were a lot of people involved in making it happen, which I always like to stress, but it all started with a vision where we told ourselves, look, there's no reason why we couldn't create what others have created already. I know a lot of people say it's impossible because you're a small team in a small city. Well, that is true. At the same time, we have individuals who have developed much larger follower bases than we are, and they're just one individual, right, that have millions of followers. So why wouldn't we be able to do it with 50 players, a town of 9,000 people, et cetera, et cetera? But I think at the base, you need to be able to connect and engage with people on a one-on-one basis. I think the big mistake that most people make, including sports teams, is to look at social media as a way to engage masses, which at scale is true, but before you actually have a mass of people you can communicate to, You have to create these one-on-one relationships, these bonds, and keep those people engaged. And the way to do that is with good content that resonates with them. Mm. The same content doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone, so you absolutely have to be aware of that. So, for example, what we experienced on the Sala rugby side is that there were many times where we hit a wall in terms of follower bases, and we started focusing on different content. So, at one point in time, we started producing a lot. You may remember that, a lot of gym content, because we ran out, quote unquote, of people that understood rugby at one point in time, and a lot more people understand weightlifting and seeing athletes working out of the gym. And then we had a jump. We generated tens of thousands of more in terms of followers on a global basis. And today we're much more granular in our content. We have content that appeals to the locals, like recent match reports, as you know as well, because you're part of the team. We've also had a lot of focus on internationalizing the content, which led to derision initially on a local basis. Yeah. Why do you produce English content when we're in Sala? But that shows that the people are not necessarily in line with what the brand represents and what it aspires to be. And lo and behold, today, roughly 12, 16, 18 months later, our follower counts around the world by far exceed our local ones. And that's not by chance, that's by design.
Excellent. And so for other sports teams who might be listening to us, what can CX Sports do to offer those teams a chance to build up their brand through their social media presence?
Yeah, I think we look at every single team on a one-on-one basis. So, for example, we're working currently in initial stages of working with Rugby Belgium, which is an interesting case study for us because they represent, as a country, what we represented as a town. They're a small country that is developing very rapidly on the international scene when it comes to rugby, has an aggressive vision, aspires to be part of the World Cup in 2027. And they came to us. They were basically intrigued by what we were able to achieve as a small town in southwestern France that nobody had ever heard of before, and how we got 250,000 plus people on Facebook, how we generated the traction we generated in the media, e-stores, derivative products, 30 derivative products, et cetera, et cetera. But I think each one of these teams, and we were ready and willing to work with all of them, regardless of sport, not just rugby. Could be football/soccer, badminton. We had people contacting us that manage badminton teams, handball, basketball, etc. It has to first dig deep and find out what their real DNA is. Like, who are you, and or who do you really want to be? That's a deep question you have to ask yourself first, because that has a significant impact on your strategy. And you need to be different. In order to stand out from the crowd, by definition, you need to be different, right? So what we usually say in the U.S., dog bites man is not news, but man bites dog, that's news. So you want to be the man that bites the dog. The rule number one of PR is to be different. So find out what makes you different, right? And that becomes your DNA. That's what you have to stress to the people, and that's what you have to really focus on developing, and the rest will follow. You have micro markets today online. You can look at fly fishing in northwestern Montana, for example, and you'll find millions of people who are interested in that topic. So no matter how small you think you are, if you're unique, you have the potential to attract millions of people around your brand, and we can help you do that.
I think that's a great message for our listeners. Some of them may still be hesitant because they may perceive there to be a high cost involved. What would you say for teams who might be hesitant about hiring a social media manager who just don't have the budget to hire someone to help with social media?
I'd say don't do it. Call us. Because what we've developed are a number of modules that allow you to get started for free at our cost, where we bear the risk in helping you get started, building some simple integrations with your websites, with your social media, helping you first and foremost identify a few simple mechanisms that can generate incremental revenue. And then if you're successful in doing that, at that point in time, we'd be interested in you reinvesting what you have earned with our work into developing your brand, creating, if you have 1,000 fans on Facebook right now, go to 10,000, 100,000, potentially a million or beyond, and we can help you do that. We've done it for others. We've done it for ourselves. We can help you do it as well.
Well, you heard it first here, everybody. I think that's the best takeaway for me, is that social media, while it might look scary and huge, but if you attack it with the right tools and with the right help, it can actually be a powerful tool for your own brand and your sports team. So thank you very much, Dom, for explaining that to me and walking our listeners through what CX Sports can do for their teams. So take the first step and get in touch. Thank you so much, Dom.
Thank you.
Subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes. Join the community at CX Sports 1 on Facebook. We will give you the tools you need to make your club stand out and succeed.